The entire video is just gonna be me doing Lady Smith Splicer dialogue. You call that tenderloin? If you serve that at any respectable hotel in New York, they'd laugh you out of town. Sorry this video is late. I started teaching middle school, so I'm busy. In the last few years, there's been a push in the gaming industry to include more female characters. And not just female characters, but proper representation of women outside the usual tropes of damsel in distress, voiceless badass, sex object, or the disposable woman. Women and non-binary folks deserve to see themselves represented in video games as real people with real lives, real careers, real personalities, etc. Think of some female video game characters. Maybe you're thinking along the lines of something classic like Zelda or Peach. Maybe you thought of an action heroine like Samus, Lara Croft, or Shell from Portal. Maybe you're thinking of something fairly new like Ellie from The Last of Us, or Jessie from Control. I think some folks might even think about Elizabeth from BioShock Infinite. But I think that the original BioShock, as well as BioShock 2, gets overlooked when we're thinking about female representation in video games. The world of Rapture is filled with really interesting people, and something that I noticed on my first playthrough is that the women are just as interesting and diverse as the men. They are scientists, mothers, working class, creatives, business owners, and political leaders. I would like to point out that there is a lack of women of color, and there aren't a lot of people of color in Rapture at all to begin with, and that's a whole other video topic right there. BioShock is definitely lacking in representation in that respect. The only non-white person in the first game is Dr. Suchong. BioShock 2 is slightly better, as Grace Holloway is one of the major characters in the story, and in Minerva's Den, Charles Milton Porter is the main character. But overall, BioShock isn't really a beacon of diversity. It would be irresponsible of me not to acknowledge that women of color absolutely are part of the greater experience of women. So I'd like to do a deep dive into the women of BioShock. I'm going to be talking about each woman's life story very shortly, why I like them, and why I think they're interesting characters. I'm certainly not implying that all of these women are good people, just why I think they are good characters. This video contains spoilers for BioShock, BioShock 2, and John Shirley's Rapture. So here we go. Diane McClintock. Diane McClintock is the first audio diary that you find in the game. You hear her lamenting about how she was once again stood up by Andrew Ryan, and that she was there at Kashmir during the New Year's Eve attack. Throughout the game, you follow Diane's journey as she goes from being Andrew Ryan's assistant to being a soldier for the cause of Atlas. In the novel Rapture, we meet Diane as Ryan's personal assistant in New York City prior to Rapture's existence. She moved to Rapture to be with him and believed in his vision of utopia. The two never married, but she was clearly infatuated with him, far more than he was with her, and even talked about having his child.
Yet, when Diane speaks of bearing my child, I am given pause.
However, Andrew Ryan was a workaholic and clearly loved the idea of Rapture more than he loved her, and stood her up on multiple occasions.
Stood up again. Second time this week.
After the New Year's Eve attack, she was hospitalized and had to undergo reconstructive surgery on her face. She briefly turned her attention to Dr. Steinman, as Andrew Ryan hadn't ever visited her in the hospital. After Diane was released, she quickly noticed that things in Rapture were not the same. Crime, violence, and vandalism were all rampant. She was frustrated and angry with people, saying that they ruined everything for her and ruined everything for Rapture. She went to Apollo Square, presumably to see just how bad things were. When she arrived, she witnessed firsthand Ryan's draconian rule over the citizens of Rapture. She saw the prison camp that Apollo Square had become, and witnessed incredible amounts of police brutality.
I was so angry when I came down here, but my God, I had no idea. There's armed men all over the place. I saw a woman climb over the fence trying to escape. One of Ryan's guards pointed at her and she lit on fire. Just like that. What's happening here?
Diane then turned on Ryan and his policies. Seeing the violence that Ryan perpetuated changed her mind, and she began to side with the general populace, and then joined Atlas's would-be army of revolutionaries. She came a little too close to discovering Atlas's true identity, completely by accident, and he killed her. You find her body on a table in Atlas's headquarters in Apollo Square. I like Diane McClintock. She really is the girl next door who tried to make a life for herself. She might come across as naive, an idealist, or too easily swayed by powerful men, but I really see her as a common person who put her faith in people. Diane's story is a tragic one, retrospectively. She trusted a powerful man, was let down by him, turned on him to side with what she thought was a proletariat liberator, and was killed by another man that she trusted. She always did what she thought was right, only to be repeatedly let down by the men in her life. In this way, she really is a symbol for all the citizens of Rapture, someone who led a normal life and trusted Ryan and came to what was supposed to be utopia. She was put off by how Ryan handled things. She rebelled, and then was stabbed in the back by Atlas. Brenda. Brenda is one of the first people you encounter in Rapture. When you meet her, she is way too far down the line of her Adam addiction, and she will attack you. In her pre-Adam life, she was the owner of the nicest restaurant in Rapture, the Cashmere. #girlboss. We don't know much about her beyond that, but the Cashmere was the premier upscale restaurant in Rapture in its heyday. So good for you, Brenda. Anya Anders' daughter. Anya Anders' daughter was another woman who believed in the concept and the ideals of Rapture, only to be betrayed by Ryan's conduct. She too felt that Ryan believed in power more than his own philosophy, and more personally, her daughter was taken to be one of the little sisters.
And now this place is busto, and my girl is gone. Worse than gone. One of those things.
Anya never teamed up with Atlas as a form of rebellion. Rather, she took matters into her own hands. After losing her daughter to the Little Sister program, she decided to assassinate Ryan. She repeatedly slept with Pablo Navarro, one of the maintenance workers, in an attempt to get information on how to get into the head engineer's office. She kept up this charade for weeks and finally managed to get in. Ironically, the head engineer had her taken away by Ryan's splicers because he thought she was a spy, and he was working on his own plan to get rid of Ryan.
Ryan's splicers are dragging the young woman off right now. I'm certain she's one of Ryan's spies, sent to fill me out. I think she is.
Her body hangs on Ryan's trophy wall. Anya, like most of the women on this list, has a very tragic story. She never intended to be an assassin. She was a women's shoe designer and a mother who, in desperate times, took desperate measures. Her bravery is admirable. Interestingly enough, her story is only told through 4 audio diaries, but sometimes less is more. Mariska Lutz. Mariska Lutz was another Rapture mother who lost her daughter to the Little Sister program. Mariska and her husband Sammy were working-class people in Rapture. In the novel, they live in a crowded apartment filled with other tenants and witness firsthand the results of Adam addiction. While visiting Arcadia, Mariska's daughter Masha screamed at the sight of trees. Masha was either born in Rapture or was so young that she couldn't remember trees from her life in the surface. Mariska laments to her husband Sammy that maybe they never should have come here.
Oh, Sammy, maybe we never should have come to this place.
Masha was later taken by Ryan's men. Still having a glimmer of hope that Masha would return, Mariska and Sammy rented a room in the Friday McDonough's. They left behind for her an audio diary with the room's door code.
Darling Masha, we don't know what has happened to you. Ryan's men have taken you away and said you are needed to save Rapture. Who needs a child to save a city? But I see these little girls crawling out of these vents, and I only wonder if you might one day crawl out of this vent and find this note. We look for you, but if you find this, come to us. It's a Fighting McDonough's in room number 7. The code to our room is 7533. We miss you, our darling child.
When they saw Masha as a little sister with a Big Daddy, they both committed suicide via pill overdose. You can still find their bodies in the room in the back of the Friday McDonough's.
We saw our Masha today. We barely recognize her. That's her, Sam said. You're crazy, I told him. That thing? That is our Masha? But he was right.
Upon my first playthrough of Bioshock, this is the first moment that I got really emotional. You don't have to be a parent to hear the desperation in Mariska's voice. She came to Rapture for a better life, only to have all of it ripped away. Anna Culpepper's story is interesting in that we only hear it through other people's perspectives. We only have one audio diary from her, and it's entirely her thoughts about Sander Cohen.
Cohen's not a musician. He's Ryan's stable boy. Ryan's corrupt policies crap all over the place, and Cohen flutters around clearing it up.
Anna Culpepper was a singer who mocked Sander Cohen and his praise of Andrew Ryan. We also learn in the book that she was remarkably on the Rapture Central Council. She had no issues being vocally opposed to Ryan's ideas and policies, and even gave him the idea for the Jim and Mary announcements, which warned the public about the dangers of oversplicing.
'Cause I don't want to be a part of this. 'Cause I don't want to be a part of this. 'Cause I don't want to be a part of this. 'Cause I don't want to be a part of this. 'Cause I don't want to be a part of this. 'Cause I don't want to be a part of this. 'Cause I don't want to be a part of this. 'Cause I don't want to be a part of this. 'Cause I don't want to be a part of this. 'Cause I don't want to be a part of this. 'Cause I don't want to be a part of this. 'Cause I don't want to be a part of this. 'Cause I don't want to be a part of this. 'Cause I don't want to be a part of this. 'Cause I don't want to be a part of this. 'Cause I don't want to be a part of this. 'Cause I don't want to be a part of this. 'Cause I don't want to be a part of this. 'Cause I don't want to be a part of this. 'Cause I don't want to be a part of this. 'Cause I don't want to be a part of this. 'Cause I don't want to be a part of this. 'Cause I don't want to be a part of this. 'Cause
What's the matter, Mary? You look like you could use a boost.
I don't feel so great. I'm dizzy, I'm nauseous, and sometimes I'm even seeing things that aren't there.
That's just the plasmid blues, Mary. You just need to slow down a bit on the splicing.
In the game, we hear from Security Chief Sullivan that Ryan has ordered him to kill her. This is where we see Sullivan start to question Ryan's methods, as in Sullivan's eyes, Culpepper hasn't done anything that's worth being executed for.
I just got the word to put the bump on Anna Culpepper. This isn't some gangster or hard-nosed political operative. We're talking about a dizzy twist what wrote a song or two that got under Ryan's wig.
In the end, however, Sullivan does execute Anna Culpepper and leaves her body in the bathtub in her apartment and steals her scarf. What an asshole. Anna Culpepper gets far more attention in the novel than she does in the game. In the novel, she is revealed to be much more of a protester, and Ryan thinks of her as a communist, but she is one of Jasmine Jolene's best friends. I think of Anna Culpepper as an artist who got a little too political for the taste of those in charge, and she suffered a state-sponsored execution similar to what conspiracy theorists think happened to Bob Marley or Jimi Hendrix or even John Lennon. Rather than becoming too personally connected with her, we see her as an example of Ryan's tyranny. Jasmine Jolene. I really feel for this girl. Jasmine Jolene was Ryan's mistress. I think it's important to note that Diane called herself Ryan's mistress, although their relationship was certainly far more public than Ryan and Jasmine Jolene's. We never see Diane mention Jasmine Jolene, so it's very clear that whatever Jasmine and Andrew Ryan had was very, very hush-hush. According to the Bioshock 2 multiplayer loading screen, her first name is actually Mary Catherine. Jasmine Jolene was the star performer at Eve's Garden and Andrew Ryan's favorite girl. Firstly, that's a lot of pressure. I'm sure she was recognized in the streets, at least in Fort Frolic, and that's a lot of pressure to be a celebrity and a sex worker. She became pregnant with Andrew Ryan's child. Having no doubt that this would tank her career, she started to look for ways to get rid of this pregnancy any way that she could. Bridget Tenenbaum, who we will talk about later, approached her and offered to pay her to take the child off of her hands. She happily gave Tenenbaum this child, not realizing that she was working for Fontaine. Andrew Ryan, though, found out that Jasmine had sold the pregnancy to Fontaine and brutally murdered her in the back of Eve's Garden. Jasmine's story, like so many others on this list, ends tragically because of Andrew Ryan. In John Shirley's Rapture, we see her working as a chorus girl under Sander Cohen. She wanted to be a star, but was never given the opportunity, until Andrew Ryan started paying for her singing lessons and began acting as her patron. If you'd like to act as my patron, my Patreon link is in the description. When she got to Rapture, she began performing as the star at Eve's Garden, which I'm sure was hardly the starring role she was looking for. Andrew Ryan paid for everything in her life, even paying for a really nice apartment. As someone whose entire career depends on being young and sexy on stage, having a child is no doubt going to throw a wrench in that. Get it? Because you use a wrench. I don't blame her for looking for any reason not to have this child. And if she can make money from it, even better. There are no laws in Rapture that would prevent her from selling a fertilized embryo. And can you even imagine the taboo of her being pregnant? And especially if word got out that it was Ryan's child? That would be disastrous, not only for her career, but her personal life too. Though it could have been that she planned to get pregnant and sell the fertilized embryo, as she really needed the money. It's not really clear. There's only one audio diary from Jasmine Jolene in the entire game, aptly titled Pregnancy. The wording of this audio diary is a little bit confusing to the story though, so here it is in full.
That creepy Dr. Tenenbaum promised me it wasn't going to be a real pregnancy. They'd just take the egg out once Mr. Ryan and I had... Oh, I needed the money so bad. But I know Mr. Ryan's gonna suss it out. Gonna know I wasn't being careful. Gonna know I sold the... Mr. Ryan's gonna be so mad at me.
It seems like she's simultaneously talking about the past, the present, and the future all at once. Now, I'm not sure if this is because this audio diary was written very early on in the writing process, or if it was a deliberate choice to make her sound more flustered and anxious. Regardless, even with Ryan's support, she wasn't making enough money to support herself in the dire financial situation that all of Rapture found itself in. Jasmine Jolene lived a complex life, completely dependent on Andrew Ryan. She lived and died by his hand. Her body is still in the back of Eve's Garden. Tasha Danu. We know next to nothing about Tasha Danu, other than she went to beekeeping school, she worked at the Silverwing Apiary, She was tired of Julie Langford stealing bee enzyme samples, and she may or may not have owned a shotgun. All of this is said in her singular audio diary, Bee Enzyme.
Julie, my dear, I am trying to run a business here. You want to spend time with my honeybees? Well, I'm gonna have to start charging you for the pleasure. If I come out one more time and find you lolling out there amongst my hives, I'm grabbing my shotgun.
She's worth mentioning, I think, because even though she is a very minor character, she helps BioShock pass the Bechdel test. If you're unfamiliar with the Bechdel test, I don't know how you got here, but check the link in the description. Julie Langford. Julie Langford is my favorite character across all 3 BioShock games. Like, if there was a quiz that was like, which BioShock character are you, that was as extensive as I wanted it to be, I would get Julie Langford every time. I feel like she got the short end of the stick in a lot of ways, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. Julie Langford was a professor and researcher at UC Berkeley sometime beginning in the 20s up until Rapture was founded in 1947. She worked for the US military during World War II, killing trees in Iwo Jima to drive out the Japanese military. She came to Rapture to run the district of Arcadia, which provided much of the city's oxygen. She was disgusted with Ryan for making people pay to visit Arcadia, but knew that she couldn't argue with him because he's the one who signs her paychecks. Here's her audio diary on the subject.
Today, Arcadia was closed off to all but paying customers. The man hires me to build a forest at the bottom of the ocean and then turns a walk in the woods into a luxury. Ryan asked, should a farmer not be able to sell his food? Is a potter not entitled to a profit from his pots? I started to argue with the man, and then I remembered who signed my checks. The only thing worse than a hypocrite is an unemployed one.
This is one of my and Chris's favorite moments in the entire game. It seems insignificant, but her imitation of Ryan is just spectacular. While we never hear Ryan say these words exactly, and he may or may not have ever said these words canonically, if you've been paying attention to BioShock, then it's definitely something that he would have said.
Is a man not entitled to the sweat of his brow?
Is a potter not entitled to a profit from his pots?
The fact that she can make fun of Ryan so precisely is a testament to how potent of a character Andrew Ryan really is. Dr. Langford began developing the Lazarus Vector, a chemical solution that would bring trees back from the dead. She unfortunately had to abandon her research as Arcadia went into lockdown as Rapture descended into a splicer-run madhouse. Her radio messages and audio diaries guide you through Arcadia as you have to follow her footsteps and finish making the Lazarus Vector. She notes the irony of the Lazarus Vector in an audio diary, knowing that she once killed trees for a living and now she's bringing them back. By the time you meet her, she's locked in her office that Andrew Ryan pumps full of poisonous gas. She is smart enough, however, to write the code to her safe on the window right before she dies. How many women is Andrew Ryan going to kill before this game is over? So there's a lot that I would like to talk about here. First of all, we have no idea how old Julie Langford is. If she's been a researcher at UC Berkeley since the 20s and the game takes place in 1960, that makes her considerably older than most people in the game. She'd have to have a PhD to work at Berkeley, which is a minimum 10 years of school. If she started her undergrad when she was 18, she'd have to be at least 28. It would be incredible to get a high-level researching position right after getting your PhD, but the BioShock universe is filled with incredible people who are the best of the best. All she says is, in the 20s. Let's say that she started doing this in 1921. If she was 28 years old in the year 1921, she would have had to have been born in 1893. And in 1960, when the player meets her, that would make her 67 years old. She's somewhere in her 60s during the events of BioShock. Older women don't get a lot of visibility as a whole, especially not in video games. And while I'd applaud BioShock for its representation of older women here, I'm not sure if I should. She does refer to herself as this old gal, but the woman who comes up in her Rapture ID profile picture is definitely not in her 60s. And her character model doesn't really indicate anything either, as it's just a Lady Smith splicer model with a poorly added lab coat. This brings me to the next set of fun facts about Dr. Julie Langford. This character was originally going to be a man, but Ken Levine noted that there weren't enough female characters in the game and changed her gender at the last minute. I should note that this has been stated everywhere on the internet, but I cannot find a primary source, so take that with a grain of salt. But it does seem like a very likely story. In fact, when you're hovering over the signs of the research lab in a game, it even says Dr. Holden Langford. There's really nothing about this character that's dependent on gender, which I think is really neat. Assuming that this was a fairly last-minute change, my biggest beef is that she doesn't get her own character model. There are only a few characters that you see in-game rather than just hearing from them or interacting with their corpse. Andrew Ryan, Atlas, Tenenbaum, Sunder Cohen, Peach Wilkins, Dr. Steinman, and Julie Langford. Of these characters, Ryan and Cohen are the only ones with unique character models. Tenenbaum is just a Ladysmith model without all the blood splatter, and again, Julie Langford is the same model but with a lab coat. And even though she has blonde hair in her picture, the Splicer model is brunette, and it makes her indistinguishable from Tenenbaum. They don't do a great job of hiding Lady Smith's, fur color thing, and they couldn't even be bothered to color her hair blonde? I guess my question is that if they recolored and retextured other Splicer models for other characters, why couldn't they do the same for Julia Langford? Even though you only see her for a brief moment, it feels really unfair to her character, as she is more central to the plot of Arcadia than Peach Wilkins is to Neptune's Bounty, and he gets a whole recolor. It seems like maybe changing the character's gender last minute caused the final product to be a little disjointed. Anyway, I just love her personality. She doesn't take crap from anyone, save for Andrew Ryan for financial reasons. She's brash and intelligent and takes her work very seriously. It appears as though she never spliced even once, and even looked down on splicing to a degree, as evidenced by her thoughts on the Saturnine.
An aging bunch of frat boys tilting back goblets of plasmids and calling it ambrosia.
And I just love how she talks. I mean, she is Wanda from The Fairly Odd Parents. So, even Atlas respects her.
Ryan's woman in Arcadia is an old Betty named Langford. An okay sort, but not above doing a dirty job for $1.
And he understands that her work is beneficial to Rapture, even going so far as to have Jack stop and undo what Ryan did before he moves on to Fort Frolic. Anyway, I've said way too much about this character, so I'll move on, but I think she's really underrated, and I think that Arcadia as a level is really underrated. Julie Langford is great, and I love her, and you can buy this shirt on my Redbubble store, which is in the description. I'm pretty sure I'm the only person on earth with this shirt. It makes me really happy. Dr. Bridget Tenenbaum. Bridget Tenenbaum was born into a German-Jewish family in Minsk, Belarus, at the time in the Soviet Union. She was a prisoner at the Auschwitz concentration camp when she was 16 years old. She observed the Nazi scientists in their incredibly unethical research in biology and genetics, learning as she went. She was a prodigy, corrected their mistakes, and worked alongside them, and it earned her the nickname Das Wunderkind. She is arguably the second most important character in the series, right behind Andrew Ryan himself. Tenenbaum was the one who discovered Adam after seeing that a worker's hands had been healed after being bitten by a sea slug. Fontaine single-handedly funded her research after all reputable labs turned her away, presumably because she worked with the Nazis. Her work was the foundation for plasmids, gene tonics, and eventually the downfall of an Adam-addicted population. Additionally, her work with Dr. Suchong is what brings the player character into existence. Tenenbaum also created the Little Sisters. Sometime after doing this, something inside of her snapped, and she realized that she had created an immoral abomination.
I feel hatred like I never felt before. In my chest, bitter, burning fury. I can barely breathe. And suddenly I know it is not this child I hate.
She feared the Little Sisters, not only for being terrifying and unholy, but because, to some extent, they triggered her maternal instinct.
These children I brutalized have awoken something inside that for most is beautiful and natural, but in me is an abomination. My maternal instinct.
Motherhood was clearly not something she wanted, but something she had inadvertently forced herself into through the most disturbing means possible. Fontaine fired her when she began to object to what they were doing to children. After the death of Fontaine, she went into hiding, taking as many Little Sisters as she could into a bunker beneath Olympus Heights. At some point, she developed a plasmid that could remove the Adam slug from the Little Sister host and rescue the child. The first time we see her, she shoots down a splicer who is about to harvest a Little Sister. It's implied that she tries to rescue these little ones when she's not in hiding in the safe house, and encourages the player to do the same. If you choose to rescue the Little Sisters, she rewards you with gifts. If you choose to harvest them, she goes eerily quiet. In the book, she has a brief sexual encounter with Fontaine, but in the game it's only the theorizing of a paparazzi who's staring at his penthouse. Ken Levine has stated that Tenenbaum is canonically autistic. This is most evident when listening to the things that other people say about her. Both Suchong and Fontaine find her off-putting, if not outright strange.
That's quite a little monster Fontaine's dug up. When she does speak, which is almost never, her accent is thick and grating. Her hair is filthy, and she seems to wear the same mustard-stained jumper day after day. But I've got to hand it to Frank. Tenenbaum is the old-timer diamond in the rough. No formal training, no experience, but put her in front of a gene sequence and she's Mozart at the harpsichord.
Spent the morning jawing with that Kraut scientist. She's damaged goods, all right. Just like all those chumps they scraped out of them prison camps. But she's no crackpot.
Ken Levine has also stated that Tenenbaum's true love was for science above all else. And truly this does seem to be the case. She helped the Nazis perform incredibly unethical experiments on people and had no qualms about turning children into parasite hosts and atom factories. But the most interesting and visible version of Tenenbaum is the one that we see, the one where she's realized that her passion has gone too far and she's done horrible, horrible things and must neglect science to atone for her wrongdoings. You can really hear the horror in her voice when she talks about the things that she's done. In Bioshock 2, she even returns to Rapture to stop the creation of the new Little Sisters, as she knows it's her research that they are copying.
You see? This is why I must fight Sophia Lamb. She is using the new little ones for something, and I have returned to rescue them. If I do not, more children will die for my sins, and the Rapture nightmare will repeat forever.
The horrors of Rapture never left her. The woman that we see at the end of Minerva's Den is not the same woman as we see on her Rapture ID card. For someone so important to the story, it's really interesting that she doesn't get her own character model. Her own model, Emily, was scrapped sometime during development and was intended to be used as a flashback of a younger Tenenbaum. She doesn't get her own character model until Bioshock 2. The Tenenbaum that we see briefly in Bioshock is just another Lady Smith splicer model, which is exactly what we got for Julie Langford. Ken Levine, in an interview from 2015, had this to say about Tenenbaum. I think if you look at that story I just told you, and you say that it's all because she's a Jew, or a woman, or autistic, that makes a much more boring version of the story. It removes all agency she has and makes her a passive actor in the face of all those things. Would you say Tenenbaum's a strong woman? Absolutely. Would you say that she's a brilliant woman? Absolutely. Would you say that she is a good woman, a positive woman? That's a really good question, and is much more interesting about Tenenbaum than it is about someone on the day she was born says, I am going to do some good. I think this really sums up Tenenbaum, if not all the characters I've talked about, very well. She's made choices, and as Andrew Ryan would happily remind you, our choices make us. Tenenbaum, by the end of Bioshock, is certainly the sum of all of her choices. She also embodied, at least for a time, one of Ryan's greatest ideals of Rapture, a scientist unbound by petty morality. And while this objectivist idea does sound rather interesting, petty morality is what keeps science from performing experiments on people like Joseph Mengele did in Auschwitz. It keeps scientists from psychologically abusing people like in the Stanford prison experiments, and keeps science from doing, I don't know, the human centipede, or turning children into hosts for slug parasites that have the weird ability to endlessly regenerate cells with disturbing side effects. So when Tenenbaum decided to grow a conscience, as Fontaine stated, she not only broke free of Ryan's ideals, but began a path that would take down not only his greatest enemy, but Ryan himself. She's a fascinating character, and while I don't know if I'm comfortable calling her a hero, she's certainly one of the biggest driving factors in the plot, and one of the reasons I love Bioshock. When I looked at a list of the most popular female video game characters, the closest thing I could find to Bioshock was Elizabeth from Bioshock Infinite. And Infinite sucks. Truly, Tenenbaum belongs on those lists. The rest of these characters, I acknowledge, are deep cuts, unless you really, really know the game. But Tenenbaum is so central to the plot and the story of Bioshock that she deserves the recognition of Samus or Lara Croft or Princess Peach or whoever. Truthfully, I think if she had her own character model in the first game, she would be more iconic, but whatever. In conclusion, Just so we are all clear, feminism is more than just we need more girl bosses. The term girl boss is a disservice to feminism, if not humanity, but anyway. Feminism is giving women the agency to choose. Do you want to be a girl boss? Do you want to be a scientist, a mother, a homemaker, an artist, some combination of all of the above? Women exist in all of these worlds. And that's one of the reasons I love BioShock. It shows you real people, real women from all walks of life. It reflects this level of realism that even though it's set in an underwater city in the 1950s, Rapture feels like it could be real because of the people who live there. The people make this city a reality. The women in this game just deserve more credit. Credit for being real, credit for being interesting, credit for being well written and well acted. I just love BioShock, okay? I love it enough to have made a whole D&D 5e setting of it, complete with a 60-plus page manual, link in the description. Anyway, I don't have a snarky ending to this one. Although, Chris did get me this new letterboard for the living room. Do you like it? A special thank you to my supporters on Patreon, Josh Ferguson, Dalton, I Am the Teacup McAdoo, Alexis Womack, Brian Barnes, and Paige. If you like the kinds of videos I make, consider subscribing if you really want to. My Patreon link is in the description if you'd like to support me there. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.